we're expecting tonight a really full public hearing for one of the most important policy discussions that the city has had in my term in office. Obviously, the affordability crisis in the city is the issue. And on that, the City Council and I actually have shared goals. We both want to lower the cost of housing for everybody in our city and the cost of living for everyone, which extends beyond the cost of rent, the cost of utilities, et cetera. And so I think there's plenty of common ground in that we share a desire to make it more affordable to live here in the city, but I remain deeply concerned that the ordinance that's been proposed is actually going to create more problems than it solves. But tonight I'll be watching closely and listening to the feedback and testimony of my neighbors and of my constituents, and to really keep open ears to think about what are the right solutions to solve the very real challenges that I'm expecting to hear tonight in testimony.
Would you still veto this proposal if it passes as written?
I would, and I'll tell you why. I don't need to have tonight's hearing to know, because I've heard it from community meetings, from when I take calls from callers on the radio. The cost of rent and the cost of monthly expenses for households is really burdensome right now for many, many families, far too many families, and I'm expecting to hear that tonight. The proposal that's being put up tonight will lower no one's rent. In fact, it will almost guarantee that people's rents go up. Because of the cap that's been put in place and the experience from other communities, what happens is that landlords raise the rent every year. The bill that's been proposed that people will be providing testimony on tonight provides for a 4% increase every year, which means over the next 5 years, I think it's very likely that rents will go up 20%. Because that's what happens in communities that have rent control policies like this. That's not going to provide any relief or any assistance to anyone today.
Just on the other side of that, some opposition saying, we needed this 6 years ago, for example, just any old number, 6 years ago. If we don't do this now, then we won't have another chance where like, hey, we're here now where the rents are even higher, even higher. I'm a renter, my rent has gone up significantly since I first moved here in 2018. So why not freeze rents where they are now, I guess is my point, to prevent further price hikes.
Yeah, again, this proposal doesn't actually freeze anybody's rents. It caps the future increase for some people. And even housing advocates agree that this is a bad version of a bad policy. So what are some of those inconsistencies or concerns? First of all, there's clear winners and losers. The people for whom they exempt are in many cases the type of landlords that we want to help. We've all talked about how owner-occupied landlords are the most desirable landlords, or often the best landlords. Those apartments will not be rent controlled. The apartments that will be rent controlled are large buildings owned by corporations or individuals with large holdings. You know who lives in most of those buildings in this city? College students. So college kids are going to get a rent-controlled apartment, whereas the landlord who has had the same tenant for 30 years, that landlord's going to be able to raise the rent however they want. Additionally, because of a very unique in this bill, unlike almost any other rent control proposals around the country, it doesn't allow for the rent to be reset between tenants. And so if you've got a neighbor who's been living next door in one of the apartments in the triple-decker next year that's been there for 30 years, and the landlord has done the right thing to keep the rent low for that person over the course of their tenancy, because they care about the person. They've been there forever, they're a good tenant, they're older. When that person leaves, they can still only raise the rent 4%. So what does that do? That incentivizes landlords to no longer do the right thing. That incentivizes them to raise the rent every year, regardless of the circumstances of that tenant, because they're not allowed to reset the rent when there's a vacancy, which is a provision in these bills in most every other place. The other thing that's deeply concerning about this, and this is really my job and the job of the City Council, which is I expect we're going to hear some emotional testimony tonight. And I've heard it in community meetings and out in the community of people who are really struggling. And I think there's this sense that this is going to meet those concerns. First of all, I don't think it will. Second of all, it's our job as policymakers to think about the other unintended consequences. This is not a bill that the landlords are going to pay for. This is not a bill that is free. This is a bill that the entire city is going to pay for. The experience has been, and the city council itself in its analysis acknowledges that tax revenues will go down because of this bill. And so what does that mean? That means everyone else is going to have to pick up the slack. So residential property owners, single family homeowners, they're going to have to pay for this. We last year had to make a really difficult choice around paying for an increased amount of funding for our schools. And we had to increase taxes. It was hard. And we heard a lot of emotional testimony then, particularly from people living on a fixed income, people whose utility bills were going up, that had struggled with a property tax increase. This is just going to put more burden on those same people. Again, this is not a free bill. This is an expensive bill that the entire city will pay for.
Mayor, are you worried that in this political climate there'll be an element of political grandstanding, that careers could be potentially made and broken on the passage of, and I'll just use the air quotes, rent stabilization, whatever that means?
I think I'm willing to give my councilmen and women the benefit of the doubt that they want to do the right thing. But it is not enough to just make an empty promise that doesn't actually deliver any relief. This is not going to lower anyone's rent. It's not free. In fact, the taxpayers of Providence are going to pay for it. And what I'm equally concerned about, which is another weakness of this version, is I think it risks bringing us back to an over-politicized past. This sets up a rent control board entirely controlled by the city council, appointed by the council president, funded with a blank check, which is flies in the face of all of the good government reforms that we've made as a city over the last 30 years. This is taking us back to a hyper-political, over-political solution for a group of tenants that it's going to be entirely complaint-based. The way this works is you have to know that you live in a rent-controlled apartment, which is based upon the complexities of their various exemptions. It's hard to know whether you live in a rent-controlled apartment. And then you file a complaint. You have to have the wherewithal, the time, the resources to go file that complaint. And then this totally political board is going to decide whether your complaint is valid or not. And then maybe you get relief or maybe you don't. It's not hard for me to envision what that means in a city where so many of our households have the adults in the household working 2 or 3 jobs, many of whom English is not the primary language spoken at home, that those folks are probably the least likely folks to take the time or to be able to come in and appeal to this board. And the people who will appeal to this board are going to be the people who maybe are in the least amount of crisis. So it's just a bad solution to a very real problem.
In a real sense, the proponents of this legislation have already engaged in a significant amount of activity educating folks about their perspective on the bill.
Yeah.
Will your administration be actively educating folks about what you see as the air quotes challenges of the bill?
Yeah, I think we already have. I've been doing community engagement as well. I've been talking about this through the news media, in neighborhood forums regularly. And so I'm going to continue to make that case, not because I don't feel the pressure of the affordability crisis, but because I don't think this is the solution to the problem. The other thing that we've been doing, and been doing far before this bill was ever introduced, is to articulate what I think is actually the solution to the problem, which is to continue to create more housing, which we're making great progress on, including well above the state minimums for affordable housing, in fact, double the state requirement for affordable housing last year alone, to continue to provide resources to tenants who are at risk of eviction or who are otherwise have the potential to be taken advantage of by landlords in this rental market by providing free legal services, which we do, and to be open to continuing to explore other solutions to this real problem. We're not done coming up with solutions to this problem, but at the same time, we need to also make sure that we don't enshrine into city law something that's actually going to make it worse and not better.
When you say that you're not done, or is your team thinking of any other sort of alternatives to rent control, if there is an alternative?
Yeah, so anybody who thinks there's a silver bullet to to this problem doesn't understand the complexities of the market, because even the council, I think, would concede that this isn't going to solve the affordability crisis. They see it as a strategy, and I see it as a one that's rife with unintended consequences is actually going to make it worse. But we need to be doing a lot of different things. We're doing many of those things. Building more housing, we're done of all of our reforms, assistance for tenants, protection of existing affordable housing. But yes, we are continuing to explore even new additional tactics and programs that could offer relief. And in the weeks to come, and certainly as I introduce this year's budget, we're going to continue to center the affordability crisis in my priorities and in what we're going to be asking the City Council to do when they pass this year's budget.
And your office requested a fiscal note from the council. Have you gotten that back yet?
Yeah, we got it this afternoon, and you should. I expect it's going to be introduced tonight, and you should ask for it from the council. We appreciate the courtesy that they sent it to us a couple hours in advance. But in that fiscal note, as I mentioned a little bit ago, they acknowledge themselves what this will do to tax revenues. They concede the point that this will cause tax revenues to go down, and therefore we're going to have to go raise taxes on someone else to pay for it. They also make some very loose estimates on how much this might cost. We've only had it for an hour or so we'll be doing a full review of that fiscal note and compare it against the research that we've already done in other places like Portland, Maine and St. Paul, Minnesota, to see if their estimates pass the sniff test and are realistic. But I expect that that'll be made public this evening, and would encourage you to ask the council for the copy of it.
Is there a compromise that you think can be had? I mean, I've heard the complaints about the board, and actually for different reasons than you mentioned, because people make the point of, I've talk to landlords and they say, we want a formula, we don't want to have to go beg someone to like give us a sob story to like allow us to increase the rent if we've done renovations. Is there a compromise that you could accept in the realm of stabilization, in the realm of controlling the price of rent?
So I can't conceive of a version of this bill that I would support, but again, I share the council's concern, and we have the same goals in trying to make it more affordable to live here in Providence. And there are many proposals, programs, approaches that other communities have taken and that I think we should consider. There's plenty of common ground between the City Council and me when it comes to housing affordability, but this is not it.
Mayor Smiley, we know that a lot of members of the City Council are renters themselves, and some are also landlords. Just wondering how this would impact you if it were passed.
So I live in a 3-family, and so this bill would exempt my property. So I don't think it would impact me in terms of my tenants, but I presume, will cause my taxes to go up because every homeowner's taxes will go up under this proposal.
Okay.
If you could communicate directly to the votes that are, let's just say, on the sideline right now, and I'll mention specifically because of the amount of public pressure that's been dedicated to Councilman Goncalves, what would you say to them if you had that sort of moment alone, that quiet conversation?
What I would say is, and what I've learned in my, albeit somewhat short tenure in office, but longer tenure in public service, is that community feedback and resident concerns absolutely should help us set priorities. But that voters hire us every 4 years to go do a job on their behalf, to do the research, to read the studies, to compare various proposals, things that have been tried elsewhere, things that have been tried in our past, and then to make an informed, well-reasoned, well-researched decision on behalf of the voters who have brought us their priorities, their concerns, and their needs. And the research and study and experience on rent control around the country is pretty clear. It's conclusive. It doesn't work, not in the way people think it works. And so that is what I would hope the councilors will have an open mind on tonight. That they listen with empathy to the concerns of everyone who testifies, because we're going to hear people on both sides of the equation and across the spectrum tonight. And then to take a step back and say, how do we actually solve this problem? knowing what we know, having done our homework around how this has worked and what other strategies are out there, what other tools are in the toolbox to maybe solve the same problem without the unintended consequences.